Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about all of the books I read in March. I read a total of 10 books in March. For the most part, they were a series that I've been working my way through or new releases. I really had a strong beginning of the month. The first week I finished quite a few books, and then it kind of tapered out very quickly towards the middle of the month. I was moving very slowly in the middle of the month, reading-wise. And it wasn't until the last couple of days of the month that I really picked up my reading again, which was great because I managed to finish a series that I really loved. And it'll hopefully get me some momentum built up to get into April because I have a lot of books I want to read in April. So first up in March, I read Illuminations by T. Kingfisher. This is her newest young adult fantasy following a young girl whose family are magical painters. They create illuminations, which are paintings that can serve a purpose or come to life. And she is trying to help her family financially. They're starting to struggle. And in trying to help them, she ends up unleashing something that wants to destroy them and ends up having to figure out a way to solve this new problem that she's unintentionally created. There's a lot of family theme and friendship that were really wonderful to see. I really love this story. I really like T. Kingfisher's younger fantasy stories. I just think they're really interesting and a lot of fun. Then I read Before They Are Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. This is the second book in the first Law trilogy. I liked this more than the first one, mostly because things were actually happening. It felt like the first story was mostly getting set up, getting to know the main characters and who they are, and in the second book we really see them working together, getting to know one another, and the plot is moving forward a lot more. There's a lot of action in this story. I'm still not in love with the story, but I do think it's really compelling. The writing style is very easy to read and just keep going through, and there are a lot of interesting things happening, so I am looking forward to seeing what happens in the final book in this trilogy, how everything comes together and wraps up. Then I read Emperor of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This is the final book in the Broken Empire trilogy. I liked this trilogy. I didn't love it. I wasn't super hooked on the main character, which he's not a very likable guy. He's not supposed to be. So that I think was my biggest problem with it, was I didn't really connect with the character and the things that were happening. As you get into his story and seeing how he's growing, the story also kind of grows outside of himself. Lots of elements are added in, lots of cool ideas and interesting things going on. I did have fun reading this series, and now I can cross another series off of my currently reading list. Then I read The Moth Keeper by Kay O'Neill. This is a graphic novel following a young girl who has become the newest moth keeper. She's learning how to do the job. She lives in a city of night where her people are only awake and about during the nighttime, and there are these moths that sustain them. They're very important to their survival, and someone needs to take care of them, make sure they're eating and pollinating certain things, and she has taken up this job. It's a very big, important role, but it's also a very lonely one. She has to spend her nights entirely on her own, just her and the moths. And there is a city of day where she's very tempted and curious about what it would be like to live in the sunshine for one day. So she ends up staying up to do this and accidentally loses the moths because of it. This has another theme of friendship, people coming together to help her, because if she's not doing well at her job, nobody's doing well, because the whole city depends on her, and that's a lot of pressure for one person. There are some interesting conversations about burnout and asking for help, accepting help when it is offered to you. I wish we got a little more time to understand the world a little better. I don't think it was super clear, to me anyway, how these two cities are related to one another, even though they never really see each other. How the moths are actually, what their real purpose is, how the things that the moths are pollinating are sustaining them. I just wanted a little bit more of the world, but also these books are aimed at younger readers, so it'd be kind of weird if they were super in-depth and detailed and complex. But I think it's a really cute story. I really liked the way everything came together and the ending, and I liked it. Then I read The Lies of Thea Jungo by Moses Osiotomi. This book came out in March. I loved this novella. I thought it was so good. I was really compelled by the story. I loved the character. It is very short, so again, you don't get a lot of world building, but it still felt like a very large, rich world, even though we only see a very small slice of it. The story follows a young boy whose city doesn't have any water, so they have made a deal with an empire, and in exchange for enough water to keep them alive, when all of their citizens turn 13, they cut out their tongues. Our main character is about to turn 13, but his mother is also not doing very well. She desperately needs water. So he makes a deal with his Ova. She will provide water to his mother for 1 year's time, and in that time he will leave the city and try and find water to save the entire city. So he goes off on a journey and learns about the world while he's out there, what's really outside of his city. He's never left the city, he's never met anyone from outside, and he's always been taught not to trust anyone from outside. So I just thought it was a very interesting story, seeing through his eyes what's out in the world, meeting other people, and learning about what else is out there, what this deal with the Empire really is a means to, because it doesn't seem very sensible to need someone's tongues, but we eventually learn why, and this is the first book in a series, so I'm really excited to see where this series goes next. Then I read The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. When The Lost Apothecary came out, I read it a little after it came out, but I really loved that story. I was very surprised by it. I'm not a big historical fiction or contemporary reader. I read them here and there, but they're not genres that I typically gravitate towards. But I just think the blending of those two and the dual timelines, that's another thing that it's not something that usually works for me. I don't know, Sarah Penner did them all so well together in a way that I really loved. And they're all three things that I don't typically go for that worked really well for me. So I was really excited about this book, but it really didn't grip me the same way The Lost Apothecary did. I do think it's an interesting story. It follows a young woman who meets this woman who does seances, and she specifically communicates with people who have been murdered to reveal who their murderer is. And this girl's sister has been murdered, and she wants to know what happened. They get called on by the London Seance Society, which is a group of men who do similar things. They do seances, and they start uncovering this plot involving them while they're trying to help them solve a murder. It's very interesting. I didn't love, there's the female point of view character, and then there is a man from the London Seance Society who's our other point of view character, and I was very surprised to see that he was the point of view character, and I just didn't love his chapters. I was much more interested in what the women were doing, but there was also a lot of romance thrown in, which isn't something that works for me either. So this was another bunch of genres and themes that I don't typically enjoy, and in this case, it was just okay. That's my personal bias, I think, mostly, but I was kind of hoping that Sarah Penner would get me again with all of the things that I don't normally like. I would end up liking the way she threw them together. I do think it was an enjoyable read. I just didn't love it as much as The Lost Apothecary. Then I read A Feast for Crows by George R.R. Martin. This is the fourth book in A Song of Ice and Fire. The series, I feel like, has been kind of up and down for me. I've enjoyed all of it. I love the world. I think it's very well written. The characters are very interesting, and to have such a large cast of very complex, well-developed characters in this large, complicated world. It's the type of fantasy story that I really love. And this book, I think my only complaint is the biggest point of view character is the one I was the least interested in. I just don't think she's a likable character. I don't think the things that were happening in her part of the story were that interesting to me, even though they relate to the world at large. And that's one of the things I like about the series, is everything going on relates to everything else going on. You just kind of have to wait sometimes to see it all come together. And this book, I know, timeline-wise, happens simultaneously as A Dance with Dragons, so you're only seeing some of the characters' perspectives, and unfortunately they, for the most part, were not my favorite characters that we were getting to see, but I am really excited to pick up A Dance with Dragons and see the other half of everything that's going on within this world at this time. Then I read Finlay Donovan Jumps the Gun by Elle Cosimano. This is the third book in the Finlay Donovan series. It's about a woman who is a newly single mother and an author who's struggling to put out her next story. She gets mistaken as a contract killer and unintentionally winds up living a double life of crime. I loved the first book. I thought it was so fun. It's such an interesting idea. I like seeing that trope of just ordinary people accidentally getting thrown into a life of crime and kind of clumsily making their way through it and somehow everything working out, hopefully. The second book was very similar idea where things get a little deeper. There are some bigger players, some other people that she's drawn the attention of, and this third book kind of follows up on some of the things we've already seen, some of the characters that she kind of owes, although she'd rather not be involved with them at all at this point. So in this installment, Finlay and her new accomplice, Vero, end up going to the police academy for this sort of citizens police training program. So they're trying to uncover who another contract killer is who could potentially be a police officer. I didn't love this book quite as much as the first two. I do still think this is a fun story. I'm probably going to pick up the next book and see where everything goes, see if it picks up a little bit more. I think the first two books for me were a little bit more fun. I think the clumsily being in this life of crime and kind of finding her footing, but also figuring things out, being very resourceful in an unexpected way, worked really well, and I don't feel like we got as much of that in this third book. There are so many resources around her, and it felt like everything was working a little too easily. Not that there were never problems along the way, but it felt like more of them just kind of solving a crime and less of them trying to solve their own lives. Still a fun story, still a fun series, but not quite what I was hoping for. Not quite as good as the first two that really hooked me. Also, it's been a while since I've read the second book. I've read quite a few things between then and now, and not having that story super fresh in my mind where there are a lot of familiar faces and follow-ups on things that have already happened, I don't think helped me connect with the story. Then I read both The Girl in the Tower and The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. These are books 2 and 3 in the Winter Night trilogy. I loved this series. It follows a young girl named Vasya who loses her mother, and she just doesn't want to grow up to be somebody's wife. She wants adventure, she loves stories, and she finds herself meeting the Winter King. There's a lot of Russian folklore and as well as Russian history kind of coming together in this story, which I think is really interesting. A lot of the major events and figures are actual things and people from history, and a lot of the magical things are common Russian folktale figures, and I liked the blending of those two things. I think it was well done in a way that didn't feel like it wasn't original. I think this did feel like an original story, even though it borrowed from real events, real figures, and also very common folktale figures. And I think it really captured a very magical atmosphere in the way that it was written. Beautiful debut story. I really wasn't expecting to like this story as much as I did, never mind the entire series being as interesting as the first book. It really kept that magic. There's a lot more adventure and action as things progress, but it still keeps that main fairy tale feeling, even with all of the things going on. I was very interested in Vasya and her life and all of the magic and things that she's trying to cope with. So that was a great way to end the month. Loved that whole trilogy. But I do have some other folklore stories that I am going to be picking up soon, so I am very excited to keep up with that. Those are all the books I finished reading in March. I hope you had a great reading month. Let me know if you've read any of these or what your favorite read from March was. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see you next time.